Oh, hi, everybody. My name is Matt Storrs, and welcome to Mattsplaining. On today's episode, I have an expert on who I'm extremely excited to talk with. Expert, please introduce yourself and tell us what you're an expert at.
I love that you just say expert. The My name is Mishka Shubaly. I'm a writer. I got my master's in fiction from Columbia, Jesus, 20 years ago, and then went on to discover I didn't want to write fiction. I wrote a string of best-selling mini memoirs through that I published through Amazon. That got me a book deal. I published my memoir, I Swear I'll Make It Up to You, in 2015, I think. And since then, for the last 7 years, I've taught a writing workshop at Yale in the summer. And then I also offer sort of writing coaching. I've worked as a ghostwriter. I worked with Mark Lanigan on his best-selling memoir. Worked with the rapper Bobby Shmurda, Bert Kreischer. I don't know. Worked with a lot of folks.
Absolutely fantastic. I know quite a bit about writing myself, and it's really always fascinating to get to talk writing with somebody. And I think that one of the common phrases that people go back to is you got to write what you know. But that's not always the case, especially if you are writing fiction or writing nonfiction. You can take something that's happened to you. You could take five things that happened to you over the course of 5 years, and you can make it seem like they all happened to you in the same day or the same week. And you don't necessarily have to put any indication that you compress the time or anything like that. Or you could go back to kind of like the ancient times, the old writings that we have, for instance, the Beowulf and Grendel story, and you can basically just take out any reference to Beowulf and you can just put your name in there and update the circumstances. So instead of the Northern Europe location, it can be in Ohio. And you're going through and you just make it a crime investigation about your history of in looking at people that have unhealthy relationships with their mothers and what that might ultimately be, because that's ultimately what the Grendel story is, if you really think about it. And even though Grendel is often considered to be misunderstood. And then I think that another thing that people often overlook when it comes to writing is that it's something you have to struggle with. They think like, oh, you got to bang your head against the wall and hope something comes out that's good. You got to write 10,000 words a day. You got to do all those things. But one of the best ways to go about writing is just to keep a notes app and don't label anything. And then once a week, just go into that notes app with these random things that you've written half asleep and just try to extrapolate off of those things and see if you can bring anything to light. And also, if you don't do it once a week, maybe try and do it like once every year. And so that way you don't have any of the context of what was going on in your life at that time to really like tie those
Yeah.
things together.
No.
Okay. And so
What? Okay. Keep
yeah,
going.
yeah, so that's the best way to do it because then you're free from those associations and you can kind of use those synapses that are firing or maybe misfiring, and you can really bring new ideas to the table that if you use the opportunity to like write in a notebook or a journal about what was happening at your life at that time, you're going to get into like the emotional depth of what happened to you. And people say that people want emotional depth and they want the context of the decision making and they want to see themselves in the characters that they read about and the people that they read about and the authors. But ultimately, all they really want to do is like be like, oh, that's a really weird thing that happened to that person. That's really interesting. I'm going to bring this up at my next dinner party when somebody asks me what I'm reading, and then they're never going to think about it again. They're going to be on to the next book. And that's ultimately the goal of writing, is not necessarily to have a lasting impact. Sorry.
Surface engagement for dinner parties,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. The surface
Okay.
engagement for dinner parties.
Yeah.
I've extended myself further than even I expected myself to do. So yeah, you want that surface, and and that's why you want to listen and read to as many books as possible, so everything kind of jumbles together And so you don't like have this lasting understanding of what this author was trying to convey, or these emotions or these complex ideas. It's just like, yeah, I think I read something about puffins, but also something about salt. And then like somebody was a bank robber. I don't know, something, maybe the puffins were the bank robber. I'm not really entirely sure. And that's what you have to share at the dinner party. And it's like, wow, the synapses of just the brainwaves are all over the place. And people are like, wow, that's really fascinating. I would love to read the book about the puffin that stole money from the salt bank. Now,
So just sort of like insulation for your head.
exactly. You want
Okay.
that insulation for your head, and ultimately writing is a process, and it's a creative outlet that allows people to share. I think it's one of the most beautiful things that human beings have ever devised and figured out. And just the ability to share one's ideas with other people is ultimately a fantastic thing. Now, based on what you've heard so far, how much of that would you say was accurate?
Oh boy, we got a lot of work to do today, buddy. I
Okay.
mean, I I've read a lot of stuff, and I've read a lot of sort of like traditional stuff. So some of the stuff that you were saying, the Beowulf and Grendel thing about the mom in Ohio, like, okay, I'll run with you on that.
Mhm.
I'm always down to hear a good bad pitch. The uh, Everything else, yeah, I mean, terrible ideas. I mean, with the notes app, sadly, you're effectively describing part of my writing process, which
Oh
is
no.
just, sort of like to have a junk drawer where you throw down prompts for jokes or funny words. I wrote down last night, why do nuns walk so fast in horror movies? And and I read it this morning and I was like, man, are you okay? Like and sometimes it is good to have a junk drawer to collect all that stuff, because sometimes you will go back through and mine that for stuff that you'll expand. But I, as a lawyer, I figured you would get this, that so much of writing is organization,
Mm,
that there are no just clean linear narrative storylines. What we're doing to create a linear story is to include everything that creates that arc and to exclude everything else. So as a writer, you can be disorganized, but at the end of the day, your writing does need to be organized.
right.
You need to include all the things that are on topic and exclude all the things that aren't.
Mm,
There's also, I mean, you talked a little bit about nonfiction. Oh, you can just sort of throw it all in there together, and no, you really can't do that. The guy who will like fight people in the parking lot about the ethics of nonfiction, because I believe very strongly that nonfiction is nonfiction, and it's got to be pure, and you got
mhm.
to let the chips fall where they may and hurt people's feelings if you have to. You need to be ruthless towards yourself. You need to reveal your own secrets. You can't change things around so you look better. There's certain ethical things about like protecting other people in the story and not
Right.
disclosing identity. But for yourself, you really need to be ruthless. And if you're inclined to make a few little changes here or there to make yourself look like less of an asshole, then that's called fiction, and that's great too, but it's not nonfiction. Nonfiction has to be pure, and fiction is sort of everything else, you know?
Absolutely. If you're gonna say something is nonfiction, but start fictionalizing so much, you are better off just going off into fiction and giving yourself the free rein to make
It,
it a fully fictional story.
exactly. Because I mean, fiction's amazing, and I don't know why people feel compelled to. Well, I mean, I guess I mean money drives everything,
Hmm.
but for me, if I in my narratives, people ask me a lot of the time, like, oh, how much of that is true? And my first response is, man, fuck you. Like, you're saying that I made some of that shit up. You don't think that if I was making shit up in my writing, that I would make myself look a little better, look
Right.
like a little bit less of a creep, a jerk, an addict. So I'm super hardcore about that. That nonfiction needs to be, it needs to be pure. But I think, but when I try to examine myself and my own work, and what I gravitate to and what I don't gravitate to, I think part of it is my own lack of imagination.
Hmm.
For me as a writer, it's far easier to just say this thing happened and then this thing happened and then this thing happened and then this thing happened, and to look like a
Well,
bad person for the things that I did, as opposed to making stuff up and having people think that I'm a weird person for things that I thought. And that makes no sense,
right.
because everybody has weird thoughts, and fiction should be like a long open dream. But
Absolutely.
one of the things that I've really tried to focus on with teaching writing is that we imagine writing to be this ethereal experience of like you're creating a world and creating a mood and telling truths. And there's a lot of sort of like woo-woo stuff. And I think that's sort of both accurate and misrepresented, because coming from that, it's like writing is completely subjective, so it's impossible to teach writing, or there are no hard and fast rules of things you should do or shouldn't do, and that like everything's permissible. And
Hmm.
everything is permissible, but most of it's bad.
Right.
And in order to write well, I think you need to understand that good writing is emotional manipulation. And if you go to a movie and you cry, you come out of it and you're like, that movie was beautiful.
Right.
Unless you're crying because you dumped your Mountain Dew Red on your lap in the middle of it or something. But it's because it was successful emotional manipulation. It was rewarding emotional manipulation. The story took you on a ride. And when we come out sort of wincing, that movie was so corny, it's because the emotional manipulation failed. So so you need to lean into the spellcraft aspect of writing. And there are certain things, that certain sort of granular nitty gritty details that I try to teach writers, things that you do to create emotion, to create a story, to bring people along for the ride. If you want to make people cry, you kill the dog.
Right.
And it's horrible. I mean, just like I adore my dog. I assume you adore yours as well.
Absolutely.
It's the most monstrous thing I can think of. But every time I've encountered a dog getting killed in
He's upset.
everyone's a critic.
Yeah.
Yeah. Dog destroys comedian. Every time we encounter the death of a dog in writing, fiction or nonfiction, it's always emotionally effective, unless it's
Absolutely.
incredibly poor writing. And so there's a lot of things like that, just elemental things that we do to create emotion. Name your characters. Don't have a main character be called she or her or the man, because it's
Hmm.
impossible to identify with them. The first thing that we do when we're going to the ASPCA to get a new dog is, oh, what are you going to call it? Or for when, God forbid, when somebody's having another baby, oh, what are we going to call this child? And then how many nicknames do you have for your dog?
Oh, I mean, I would say, I mean, well, his full name is quite a bit, but yeah, I would say at least like seven or eight.
It's an expression of love. It's an
Right.
expression of respect. It's one of the ways in which we engage. So I always say name your characters and give them memorable names. If everyone's named Stephen, it's sort of blur together. And but also don't give everyone literary names. You can't have a Cleopatra in every story.
Right, absolutely. You want them to have their own identity, I feel.
Yeah.
The more you can add to them to make them seem like real people with wants, needs, desires, and flaws, the more likely you are to make them memorable.
Yeah, yeah. And that's, we're talking about specificity.
Hmm.
And it's one of those things, a lot of times people want to write a universal story or a story that everyone can identify with, and so they leave it intentionally vague or blank of detail, and that's the exact wrong thing to do. Because if I say a guy named Matt put on his pants and walked to the store to get bread, that's a universal story, but it's completely unmemorable.
Right.
And to stitch in here's another like little shortcut. There's no article of clothing that says more about the wearer than a pair of shoes.
That's a great point.
When Matt puts his pants on to go to the store to get bread, is he wearing flip flops? Is he wearing combat boots? Is he wearing Crocs? Is he wearing those toe shoes?
Hmm.
Is he wearing a pair of red pumps? When I figured this out, the shoe thing, I figured it out one day in class, and we went around the class, and we'd been meeting for 4 sessions at this point, so we sort of all knew each other and knew each other's writing. And it was stunning how we went around the class and like looked at people's footwear and saw what a reflection it was of who they were as people.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, just thinking about like you hit on so many facets of me just in your hypothetical, because I was one of those people that did wear toe shoes when they first came out. And I was so upset when I missed the class action lawsuit to get my repayment. And then now for years and years, I was apprehensive about getting Crocs. I thought they were the worst thing. But then they came out with the Margaritaville themed Crocs. And
Oh,
I got those for my birthday this year. And frankly, I wish I would have committed to them sooner. They're unbelievably comfortable.
I I'm so deep in it now that I am a Crocs and socks kind of
Hell
guy.
yeah. Hell yeah.
I just feel like, and I look at my sad, pathetic, comfortable feet, and I think, here is a man who has aggressively stopped giving a shit what
Absolutely.
anyone, particularly single women, think of him. I'm happily married. I'll go to the grocery store in like gym shorts and a tank top and Crocs and socks and a fucking 7-Eleven hat and a neck beard and like, and I think all of that's, if you think about it as narrative storytelling, that says so much about a character where they are in their life.
Absolutely. What their priorities are, what they're looking for beyond just the bread that they're going out for. You're getting an idea of how they prioritize themselves and how they prioritize themselves to the world.
Yeah, yeah. The other thing that's incredibly revealing about who we are as people, and that's sort of essential to telling a specific story, is the cars that we drive.
Hmm.
The You're in New York, right?
I am, yeah.
So like Robert Moses' great legacy of sort of like destroying the outer boroughs by trying to make New York into a driving city instead of the wonderful world-class walking city that it should be.
Yeah.
Um, and Americans are obsessed with our cars. So if you're at a stoplight and a truck drives up next to you, well, what kind of truck is it? That could be anything. That could be Chad Ryden, this comic who I love, who lives out in New
Ooh.
Mexico. He's building an Earth ship. He has like a little like 1981 sand brown VW mini truck
Hmm.
versus a 2022 white lifted Ford F-350 with the truck nuts. Those are two radically different people. They don't even live. It's like same planet, different worlds. Chad Ryden in New Mexico. He's a great guy.
Absolutely.
He's actually someone you should talk to. He's a wonderful person.
Oh, yeah, I would love to. Yeah, that reminds me of when I was in my undergrad, I had a creative writing professor that had us read Fun Home. And they, beyond the regular writing and everything, one of the things that they did to try and instill the idea of specificity was we would have a quiz every class, and it would start really like general about the characters and like actions that they did in the graphic panels in the story. But then as it went along, it would be like, okay, what was the brand of bread that was on the bread truck on this page, and what was the image that was on the bread truck? And people, nobody, like almost nobody would get it right. But it was just like, that's how specific this is. There is a specific thing that they chose to convey a message that works to the greater pieces of the whole. And even for that one image on that one panel, it's still important.
Yeah, and some of those details are such significant locators. They're sort of cultural signposts. One of my one of the stories we're workshopping this year, there's a Fisher Price viewfinder
Oh,
in
wow.
it. And if you remember those are it's a very specific memory. And
Mhm.
I think anyone who's ever encountered one of those in the wild, either you remember it from your childhood or you remember experiencing it later as a sort of retro thing or like discovering one at a thrift store. Another thing that appears in one of the student stories is an AOL email address,
Oh, great.
which is again another like you can't see an AOL email address, but or visualize it, but to have that appear, like that's a very specific time window. I remember like getting all those CDs from AOL with like 100 hours free and the clunky interface and sort of what that time meant, you know.
Absolutely. Yeah. I will say this, I don't want to give you ideas for your class or anything like that, but I know plenty of people that still have AOL email addresses, but they are of a very particular age and very set in their ways. So I don't think that they know that you can get other email addresses. So
At this point, anybody who still has an AOL email address, I have nothing but respect for them.
yeah, I mean, that's just commitment.
But also those, I mean, talking about details. Those are the same people who put two spaces after a period and not one.
Right.
And to say that Grace was the kind of woman who put two spaces after a period instead of one. Suddenly, you know who this woman is. You have an idea, an inkling, an understanding as to what her age, where she sort of comes from, that she has enough of an investment in grammar and punctuation that she's still doing this thing that she was taught in grade school, whatever, 40 or 50 years later.
Mishka, this has been so insightful, and I feel like I've learned a lot, and I'm absolutely sure that the listeners have as well. If people wanted to learn more about you or more about writing, where would you recommend that they go?
Well, I'm the only Mishka Shubaly out there. I'm at Mishka Shubaly on Instagram and Facebook. If you search my name on Amazon, that will lead you to all my writing. My website is mishkashubaly.com. I'm not doing a whole lot of touring or performing right now. I have a record I'm working on that I'm with one of the dudes from Riverboat Gamblers, trying to
Oh,
finish that.
fantastic.
I'm working on another book length project with a famous marathoner,
Oh,
and
wonderful.
and then I'll be teaching my writing workshop at Yale next week, and I do writing coaching for writing students, but I am easily found.
Wonderful. Absolutely fantastic. I can't thank you enough for joining me today, and I had an absolute blast.
Awesome, great to catch up with you, buddy.
You too. Thank you. My name is Matt Storrs, and this has been Mattsplaining.
Dude, that was the most Ira Glass outro. That was perfect.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah,
Today on This American Life.
Before we go today, I want to thank Ryan Lawson, my dear friend, for making the theme music for Mattsplaining. Ryan can be reached at beatblenderstudios@gmail.com or at Beat Blender Studios on Instagram and TikTok.